So Barbara and I will just be sharing the results from the World Café that was conducted at the Fairness Gathering last year in June. So we'll just highlight some key themes that emerged, and then we'll open it up to invite your thoughts and reflections on how these findings resonate with your experiences. But first, I'll pass it over to Barbara to just kind of go over a bit of a background first.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Maddie. We'll formally introduce ourselves. My name is Dr. Barbara Lee, and I'm an assistant professor at the UBC School of Social Work and co-director of the Center for the Study of Services to Children and Families and a Knowledge Mobilization Scholar at UBC. And with me is Maddie Cathcart. So if you want to say a few words to introduce yourself.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Yeah, I'm Maddie. I am a volunteer at the center with Barbara. I was previously a practicum student in the Bachelor of Social Work program at UBC at the center. I've been working with Sherry and Fairness for about a year now, working on the World Cafe data as well last summer. I'm currently a Master's of Public Policy student at SFU, hoping to work in policy advocacy and social workspaces in the future.
Thanks. Yeah, and you just advance to the next slide. There we go. And yeah, just really wanting to ground ourselves, locate not only who we are, but where we are. So we want to acknowledge that for me and at UBC, we're situated on the traditional ancestral and unceded territories of the Musqueam Hunkaminam speaking people. And being an online webinar, that many of you are situated across the province in various traditional territories and taking a moment to really reflect upon what it means to be guests and visitors of these lands, and really recognizing that 95% of British Columbia is on unceded traditional First Nations territories. And I find this, this image of this map quite powerful in recognizing many of the traditional lands that we're on, but also this quote that recognizes that maps are colonial and political objects, and they exercise power by what they include and exclude, and that this is really quite simplified and incomplete representation of the history and the peoples and the stewardship of the land in which we're on, and wanting to recognize that as a grounding place for us as we connect in this virtual space. Um, so I'll set us off with a little bit of a background before we really move into the meat of things with the World Cafe. But really wanting to talk about this partnership, and I say partnership, but really a friendship with fairness that has evolved over 3 years. So, a little bit of the context of, fairness. Sherry had reached out to UBC many moons ago. I was looking back on some of our kind of records in history, and it was actually May of 2023, spring, that we got connected. So we're celebrating a bit of an anniversary at this point in time. And it was just an early connection to talk about, where our interests align, what are we about, what do we want to do? And I think one of the biggest thing was really sharing your passion about this work, about kinship families, equity, social justice, and that very much aligns with social work values and my work around child welfare and various communities. And so we were thinking about, okay, well, how can we come together to achieve this common goal, to support one another in this work, and recognizing that, myself in a place of higher post-secondary and institution, that there's lots of resources and supports, but yet, how can we come together to share this work? And so one of the things was that I teach a graduate research course, and we partner with MCFD to conduct applied research. And Sherry and Gail at the time was very enthused about like this idea of working alongside and challenging MCFD in the work, because certainly the applied research informs and shapes their policies and practices. So we engaged in a circle agreement to do partnered research in the context of the course. And of course there was a finished research report and open access e-journal that was achieved from that. But at the same time, we were seeking out some additional funding and supports to be able to really engage in the work that we wanted to do, which was to build some evidence to again inform that advocacy work that Fairness engages in. And so that's where we applied for a community university engagement support fund through UBC. And we were successful, and that really launched us off into this work that we're engaging in. So as I mentioned, there was the open access e-journal report through the Fairness UBC MCFD partnership. It's called Examining Support Needs for Children, Youth, and Caregivers in Kinship Out of Care Arrangements. Just highlighting it here. There's a QR code if you want to make reference to it and read. And then, of course, through our Q's work, some of those earlier conversations as we talk about like research-informed policy and advocacy, what we realized was that Fairness, you held some consultations with MCFD and had provided it back, and that was data. Like for me as a researcher, I saw that as rich data, and there was a shared goal to be able to turn that data into a fairness report that really highlighted your voices as kin caregivers and some of the gaps in service needs. So we turned that around into a report called Reimagining Family Support Services, Perspectives from Kinship Caregivers. So we're very happy, again, of making this an open access report, and it's been widely shared, and we can see that there's uptake in readership from really around the world. So it's quite enriching to be able to see that reach that this report has made, and really highlighting your voices as kin caregivers. And also through our work, we had this very creative idea, really inspiring from Sherry of, let's just do some videos. And we went with it. And using the Q's funding, we hired a documentary videographer and producer. We captured some lived expertise around what it looks like to care for your relatives' kids. And we decided to launch it as some film screening. We held a film screening in Vancouver. We held one in Okanagan. And with both of them, we had panel discussions to not only hear the richness of these stories, but to engage it in a deeper way, also offer outreach and just knowledge sharing. And it was such a rich experience from those. We've also just talked about our process of coming together as a community, for me as an academic scholar, and again, really mobilizing that knowledge exchange through a podcast where we talk about, those relational pieces of coming together in collaboration. So that's a bit of the context that brings us to this new phase of this partnership and this new phase of work, where we call it What We Wish We Knew, Reimagining Training for Kinship Families and Social Workers. Because through all of that work and time together, there was the continued sentiments that were shared was that you as kin caregivers, certainly brings a lot of strengths and resources, but at the same time really felt quite unprepared, not knowing what was ahead. It's oftentimes coming in at a time of crisis, of being a kin caregiver and all the responsibilities that come along with that. And at the same time, the social workers that you may or may not be connected with similarly didn't really have a great sense of what it meant to support you and your family as a kin unit. And so through those conversations, we have proposed this new initiative of moving forward of being able to get a sense of what kind of like training we can offer kin caregivers and social workers. So to launch that, we did our first phase of a World Cafe, starting with fairness to capture essentially all of that, which Maddie will share a little bit further. And our idea is that we're at this point of sharing back some of those findings, those themes, to get your feedback, gather what you think, and get your thoughts about what it would look like to develop and launch a broader provincial survey to hopefully as many kin caregivers as we can to further identify some learning needs that for kin caregivers as well as social workers. So once we've gathered a bigger sample and more robust data, that's where we'll hopefully be able to use that information to inform the development of an empirical based lived expertise grounded training, again, for kin caregivers and for social workers. So that's where we are of in between phases and bringing it back to the collective community where we started with. So just a little bit of a backgrounder about the World Cafe was that we wanted to offer a format that was engaging, that was open for discussion, that assesses the perspectives and knowledge present within kin caregivers. We didn't necessarily want to, do another survey or interviews or focus groups, but really an organic, accessible way to capture various perspectives that came together at the gathering, because that was one of the major points in which we had a number of you together. What we did through the World Cafe is that we had 3 tables focusing on a specific question, and we had 15 minutes of small group discussion that was facilitated by a fairness member at each of the tables. And participants were able to respond to those questions by noting their comments on these little sticky notes as represented in that image there. And then we prompted people to be able to move around after 15 minutes to a different table of their interest, and had another round and then another round, so that there was opportunity for everyone to be able to engage with each of those 3 questions. And then from there, we moved into clustering those responses together through a broader sticky chart, as represented in this picture here, that we tried to cluster some of the commonalities, and then we took that data and further created some codes and categories, which is our data that we have to present before you. So I'm going to turn it over to Maddie to share our results.
Thank you so much, Barbara. So the first table at the World Cafe asked questions about training and support for kinship caregivers, with 2 nested questions that we have here on the screen. The first being, looking back at the beginning of your kinship caregiving journey, what information, training, or support do you wish you had received? And the second being, what do you think new kinship caregivers need to know when they take on this role? So at this table, we had 87 unique responses, 70 from kinship caregivers and 17 from non-kinship caregivers. And moving on to the next slide, we have our first 3 large themes that emerged from this table. So the predominant response type noted information-related needs. So responses highlighted needs around wishing they knew what they needed to know at the beginning, finding and navigating social support, financial support, disability support for children and for kinship caregivers, and navigating information and resources specific to the kinship caregiving journey. Responses stated things like, where is the guidebook for us? How do I get started in finding out where to go? Where are the supports? And where is the direction on what to do and when? Responses directly noted needing support with navigation in roles as kinship caregivers, noting a roadmap of sorts would have been beneficial. This included navigating relevant information, support services for kinship caregivers and the children in their care, and accessing financial support, with one response noting overall process, how to work with MCFD and an advocate, how to access resources for supporting the child, and process for dealing with trauma, FASD, assessments, dealing with school. 17% of responses at this table from non-kinship caregivers also highlighted the difficulty of finding information, with some noting the difficulty of finding information about resources available specifically to kinship caregivers, with one response noting they, kinship caregivers, were not given access to information and didn't have the same information as foster parents. Another theme that emerged was disability support. So, about 12% of the responses from kinship caregivers included mentions of needs around disability support, such as a lack of knowledge of disability supports available, a lack of knowledge and support in accessing assessments for children in their care, and a lack of disability support for caregivers themselves. About a quarter of responses from kinship caregivers that noted disability support in some way also discussed a need for disability support in schools for children in their care, with responses stating disability services should be provided for each child upon diagnosis in schools, and another response stating move support into high schools for students with disabilities. Another theme that emerged from the responses from this table were around financial and legal support. So a handful of responses from kinship caregivers noted needing legal support to navigate their rights as kinship caregivers, the rights of the children in their care, and the rights to benefits afforded to kinship caregiving families. One response offering advice highlights this need for resource navigation and support, stating, do not sign a contract without reading and understanding in all caps. Another response noted the importance of understanding the legal dimension of kinship caregiving, stating in their response, need to know the legal arrangements, e.g. 5401, 541. And a handful of responses from kinship caregivers noted a need for financial support and access to information about what financial supports were available to them in relation to their particular legal arrangement. Moving on to the next couple of themes that were found at this table. On the next slide, we have respite and mental health and support for caregivers. So fully a third of all responses at this table noted a need for some form of support for kinship caregivers, such as connection to other kinship caregivers, respite, social support, self-care, and mental health support. A handful of responses to this question were also reflections on the unanticipated challenges of kinship caregiving. These reflected on the journey of kinship caregiving as very challenging and a difficult time, but that hard days and grief were a part of loving our kids. Responses also reflected on assumptions about the kind, quality, and level of the relationship between kinship caregivers and the children in their care. These responses discussed difficulty with attachment, a lack of relationship prior to having the children in their care, as well as a lack of information about the child's circumstances. And a handful of responses from kinship caregivers also highlighted the need to be an advocate as a kinship caregiver, and this being a central role. You will need to be a strong advocate for your child, as one response noted. And moving on to the second table at the World Café, this posed questions about accessibility and learning preferences for learning opportunities in the future. The nested questions were if training or learning opportunities were available for kinship caregivers, what would make them most helpful or accessible to you? Would you prefer online, in-person, self-paced, interactive, or group-based learning? And are other formats or supports that would make it easier for you to participate? So there was 40 unique responses at this table. 33 were from kinship caregivers and 7 were from non-kinship caregivers. Of those who noted a preference for the method of delivery, overwhelming majority, about 60%, preferred in person. 41% of responses stated a preference for online, with a majority preferring asynchronous and a minority preferring synchronous. Responses that discussed delivery preferences also noted preferences for flexible or hybrid options, and there was a noted desire to incorporate group-based learning regardless of delivery method. Participants primarily identified three material supports to facilitate participation in any learning opportunities. These were mainly transportation, funding, and childcare. And then about 70% of the responses at this table offered suggestions for learning opportunities. So of those responses, about a quarter noted suggestions for material that should be covered, such as training appropriate to the stage of kinship care that you're in. So the most common type of requested material to be covered in any kind of learning opportunity was resource knowledge and resource navigation. Some responses also noted potentially education directed towards children and youth raised in kinship care, and one response highlighted the importance of cultural humility in any learning opportunity, stating, ensure the person is properly trained culturally. In terms of practical consideration, one response highlighted accessibility, such as large text. Participants also noted that duration should be no longer than 1 hour, and one participant noted that promotion of the training or educational opportunity should occur well in advance to maximize access and participation. And then we'll move on to the last question that the World Café covered. So this focused on training for social workers, with the nested questions asking, what do you wish social workers understood or knew before working with kinship caregivers like you? And what would have helped you feel seen, supported, or respected in your early interactions with social workers? There was 93 unique responses at this table, 76 from kinship caregivers and 17 from non-kinship caregivers. And moving on to the themes that we found, the most consistent response from kinship caregivers was that they are unique clients with unique needs, experiences, and knowledges, and should be viewed as such by social workers in working relationships. Both kinship caregivers and non-kinship caregivers acknowledged the need for support for kinship caregivers in their role. Responses noted either a need for direct support or support accessing supportive resources, with one response noting kinship caregivers will experience trauma, challenges, distress raising the child. They need support, counseling, respite, funding. And another response noting social workers should learn how to convene circles of support for each family, a natural circle of support. Another common theme that emerged from the response at this table was around the experience of the child and trauma. About 15% of responses from kinship caregivers discussed the experience of the child and trauma in relation to their working relationships with social workers and interactions with the child welfare system. Kinship caregivers noted that after their interaction with the child welfare system, they were still left wanting a more child-centered approach to the care that they were receiving. In response to what do you wish social workers understood, a kinship caregiver response said, the needs of the child's experiences, and what the child wants. Kinship caregivers also wished that social workers were more attentive to the complexity of trauma in these experiences. Trauma was discussed in responses as both occurring prior to contact with and as a product of interacting with the child welfare system. Kinship caregivers wish social workers had an understanding of the trauma the child has experienced and that the child protection system causes trauma as well. These all highlight the importance of a trauma-informed, person-centered care for social workers in the child welfare system, particularly when working with kinship caregivers. Both kinship and non-kinship caregivers' responses explicitly noted the need for further training for social workers, primarily around communication and perceived bias. Kinship caregivers expressed desires for better communication strategies and more empathetic communication from social workers, and described experiencing judgment, a lack of respect, and a lack of culturally informed practices in their working relationships and interactions. Kinship caregivers also noted that they wish social workers were more familiar with the unique experiences of kinship caregiving, saying social workers should know more about your challenges that kinship caregivers encounter, with kinship caregivers noting they wish social workers knew the impact of being forced into conflict with the parent in order to care for the child. This is painful. And another response noted, just because you are a relative doesn't mean you have a relationship with the child. Responses from non-kinship caregivers highlighted the importance of reducing burnout and increasing support for social workers so that they can do good work with their clients. Responses also noted the importance of connecting learning to frontline work, with one response from a non-kinship caregiver noting having caregivers and those with lived experience in the classroom. And moving on to the next themes that were found at this table. So another theme that emerged from kinship caregiver responses was institutional or organizational issues that affected their experiences with social workers in the child welfare system. Responses highlighted how the service user, in this case, kinship caregivers, is impacted by an underfunctioning child welfare system. Noted in responses were things like wish they didn't keep changing the workers so often and keep tabs on your social worker and their caseload, need more, hire more. These responses highlight how individual experiences systemic issues, with kinship caregivers stating, forget about the budget of MCFD, we don't care, we need support. There were also two distinct response types from kinship caregivers at this table relating to knowledge, knowledge gaps, and kinship caregivers as knowledge holders. A handful of responses from kinship caregivers noted that they wish social workers knew they had knowledge gaps, as one respondent very succinctly notes, I wish they knew I knew nothing about kinship care. But responses from kinship caregivers also identified them as elders with valuable life experience and knowledge of what is best for their families and the children in their care. Again, highlighting that kinship caregiving is a unique and complex experience. As noted in responses to almost every question in the World Café, both kinship and non-kinship caregivers highlighted the need for knowledge related to supportive resources and funding. Kinship caregivers in their responses noted that we need help and it's overwhelming trying to navigate and access resources. Kinship caregivers also noted funding as an issue they wish was more considered in their working relationships with social workers. One respondent notes that what program we are steered to will impact us financially, i.e., not recommending programs that keeps kinship caregivers in poverty, and grandparents' retirement funds did not include raising another child. Non-kinship caregivers noted that child welfare workers should be able to create professional circles of support to meet needs and know how to coordinate and access support for families and learn to be a family, child, and youth champion, not a gatekeeper of supports and services. And on to the next slide, all of these responses and any input and reflections from the group will inform the development of the province-wide survey that Barbara mentioned earlier, and to better understand training and support needs of kinship caregivers and their families. And with that, we invite any questions, comments, reflections that you have about the themes that emerged from this World Café and how these findings might resonate with your experiences.
Okay, so has anybody got any questions or comments or anything they would like to share?
Yes, I had a thought. Do I need to raise my hand?
Oh, that's okay. You've already started talking. We're good. Go ahead, Cheryl.
Okay. Um, it sounds fantastic. What has happened? What I found was hard as a grandmother doing this was not being a grandmother, but if you had previous experience with a system that has not altered, it changed how you were able to um, how to communicate with a newer view of things. Because if you had a negative experience first, it was hard to connect. Does that make sense? Like, the old saying, once bitten, twice shy thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sort of fits. So if you have had other experiences, then you are not going to feel quite as open to the new changes. And and then when you are trying to do that, um, those old experiences get in the way. So there could be people who have had negative experiences that really should be doffed off to one side, but that's kind of difficult to do. And it takes time. It takes a lot of time. It's taken me 30 years believe it.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of trauma, and I think there's a lot of people who aren't open to
Yeah.
sharing. And I think that's a very valid point, and I think that that does come across. We know ourselves from when we do our physical gathering, that some people choose not to talk. I'm always amazed at how many people will share their stories, and at the World Café, how many people did participate. So but it is an underlying fact, and we all know that people, if they don't feel they've been heard before, they might not want to raise their voice. And I think that's a very valid point, Cheryl. Any other comments from anybody or any other questions?
I'd like to just express gratitude that this is happening, and I hope that all that information gathered is going to then be propelled into action and not just information gathering. And as I was listening to the report, I kept thinking, but what about, but what about, but what about? And honestly, all of the things that I'm going, but what about, showed up in that report. And that was very reassuring. So a lot of work went into it, a lot of thought in the reporting process of it, and it's fantastic. So how do we put it into action? So thank you.
Go ahead, Bonnie.
Yeah, I think it was really good. I think there's a lot of good stuff. I've been doing a fair amount of thinking about this production that's coming up with Marcia, and it's really good because I mean, obviously, your perspective is social workers, but as I've moved sort of through the process now, I'm into year 11, and yes, I still have a lack of trust of the MCFD and any social workers. There were some good and some bad, and some really bad. But I think what you've captured here is very, very good. The thing that I'm starting to get into a little bit too, and it might be too specific, is the school districts and teachers and their lack of education. So that's somewhere it's in the back of my mind as another issue that we've got to get out the broader message to a variety of audiences, and maybe this will come with our film production.
You know what? It's funny that you raised that issue, Bonnie, because this morning I was on a call with First Call, and they have over 100 and more different organizations. And today there was a fellow on there who was talking. He was a provincial coordinator for community schools. And he was talking about if you, as an organization, are trying to get your information into the school, how tough it is to go through the school board and the school districts. And that's what we've been banging our head against for the last couple of years. So when he said that, right away I said, okay, wait a minute. This is the guy that we need to connect with, because if we can connect with him, and then we can get brochures and things all across these community schools across the province, then we can raise awareness of kinship care and what we're doing.
I'd like to formally be on some of their Pro D days as speakers.
Yeah. That I don't know if we can get there from the community partnership with the schools, but it's worth a shot. I mean, that's what our intent was when we were trying to go through the school boards. And we had a volunteer who spent a lot of time in a huge spreadsheet on, connecting with each of the school boards across for the beginning, at least the Lower Mainland, which has many school boards. So yeah, it's something new.
Yeah, we're advocating on the, to a great degree, but then, I just think every year I have to go through the same journey, telling the teacher, educating them really on, early childhood trauma, attachment, learning disabilities, and how that affects the child. And it's just exhausting, like if they had a better knowledge of, what we were dealing with and what those kids have been through. They just can't relate to it. One teacher is quite typical. The child's not listening. Well, yeah, they're listening, but they don't understand what you're trying to tell them. So It's not a disobedience or disrespect. It's a lack of being able to comprehend because of perhaps a learning disability of what's being taught. And I sympathize with the teachers because they've got a real collage of different levels of children there. I think it's getting increased. It's very, very difficult for them, and lack of educational assistance. So I don't know how they actually do it, but so I have my hat goes off to them on the one hand, but on the other hand, it's a lack of knowledge, I guess, is what I'm getting at.
Yeah. And I just want to acknowledge Sharon's comment about the PACs. And we did try that route too, but yeah, it's really hard to get in there. I mean, I think there must be some kind of maybe we're shooting at the wrong direction. Maybe we should be trying. I'm sure the principals and people like that across province might have some kind of committees or something where if we could get in front of them and do a presentation. So yeah, it's one of those things that we're always.
It's the unions that you have to get through.
Yeah.
That's who kind of limits what their education is. The principal doesn't override a union. So you could talk to the principal and say, I'd like to make this, but then the union is like, who are you to tell our people what to do?
Right.
That's the same for PAC. The PACs cannot tell the principal and the teachers what to do. I've been on our PAC for 5-6 years now. All we can do is raise concerns because of, provincial and union but you can go to the principal, you say, hey, this is what we want. Can you make it happen? And they can look into it. If they really care, they will. But I mean, we have teachers that are old school and go boom, 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 and they won't do anything above what they are legally responsible to do, and they will run to their union, and then there's trouble. We have a teacher that every time our PAC says we want to do this and this, she's like, oh, she's gonna complain.
Yeah,
and it's the one teacher, right, that is just, yeah. So
well, and the teachers get professional development on, kids who come in with trauma and the various different things through the foster care system. But our situation is very unique, and our family structures are very unique to a paid foster parent and a professional foster parent. And I'm not diminishing those children's needs or those foster parents' needs to find supports for the children that they care for, but ours are very different and unique, and that isn't recognized because we're so invisible and we're so misunderstood. And I think the larger the outreach, the better it's going to be for our kids. Our kids aren't the only ones coming in with trauma needs and learning disorders, but yeah, it's a bigger thing, but ours is very unique, and I think it needs to have its own identity. So, and I think that's what Fairness is working hard to do.
we deal with a lot more than foster parents do as well. The foster parents just have to deal with, this child. We deal with the child, either our son or daughter, because we love them. With the foster parents, the social workers deal with the parents that are having troubles.
That's what I was saying. Our needs are very unique and very, very complex. Yeah. Our children's needs are.
Yeah, we have two sides, right? We have the children that we need to keep safe, and we have our child that we want to help to get better yeah.
Okay. I just wanted to let people know, Bonnie was talking about Marcy. Marcy is a journalist who has approached us a couple years ago and has been trying to put together a documentary and getting funding for that documentary. And I'm happy to say that they did a 10-minute video where there was a few of us, 4 or 5 of us, that were involved in it. And it was accepted by the Knowledge Network. So they are getting funding for that. So we have an upcoming gathering. We have a gathering every year, a physical gathering of Kinship Caregivers. And this year we're going to be in Vernon, like I've said in the chat. And Marcy and her team of photographers are going to be coming to the gathering this year, and they'll be filming little bits and pieces of all of the main characters, but also just capturing the ambience, I think, of the gathering as well. So we're really excited about that. So yeah, that's another sort of thing that's been going on for quite a while that's come to fruition now, and it'll probably take a couple of years or a year and a half before they actually get the final documentary done. But we're pretty excited at Fairness to be part of that.
I had a meeting this week, and the producer did say that they have a time frame of releasing it in the first half of 2017, or sorry, 2027.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Okay, have we got any? I'm just looking, I don't see anything else in the chat, unless I've missed something.
Just curious, what are next steps? You may have addressed that earlier in the presentation, but could we go over that again, please? As far as what you're doing with the data collected?
Well, we that World Café, some of the data and themes came up, has really allowed us to see some patterns of like responses and issues. So we're gonna use that and our conversations together here to inform developing a larger survey, a broader comprehensive survey to identify, topics that would be helpful for training for kin caregivers as well as social workers and format. And because I think the World Cafe was quite broad discussion, and now we have some identified categories, and we could flip it around to some questions. And so our idea is to be able to co-create that together. And then maybe by June next month, be able to have a larger comprehensive survey. And again, having anyone, all of you, whoever, to just kind of look at it, give us feedback, test it out a little. And if we're all okay, then our desire is to be able to share it out by the end of June, because I think Sherry was identifying that First Call has quite an extensive network within their newsletter and listserv. So they're also a supportive place to be able to send out a link to a survey and then collect the data over. We have yet to figure out a time frame. We'll probably also just kind of keep track of the response rate. And then from there, once we feel that we've got some robust data, we're starting to see some pretty solid patterns and representation in the responses, then we could probably just end it and then use that to really inform, okay, what are some of the training needs? What are some topics? What is it going to look like? And work together to develop and draft out some sort of educational curriculum module, identify audiences of that. So that's kind of loosely some a vision forward. Yeah, but I mean, I'm just sharing that based on some of our conversations together, particularly with Sherry and Gail earlier with World Cafe. But what do you see as some priority next steps? How do you want us to move forward together? Who wants to step up and be part of this? Because a big part is that we're doing this together, and Sherry and I recognize our limited capacity of moving things along too, and wanting others to join in this work with us.
So that call out is to individuals, or that call out is to agencies or organizations? Who wants to step up question?
A little bit of both. I mean, there's an element of individuals who will be able to look at the survey, give some feedback, kind of look at the responses with us, but also agencies who might be able to share the provincial survey to be able to offer some consultation and support and champion, the educational modules that we create for kin caregivers as well as social workers. So a little bit of both.
Well, I'm just one person, but I'll do what I can. But I'm
I'm
just
just wondering, oh,
one
sorry.
person. Yeah.
I'm just wondering what McFamilies has to bring to the table, because we're obviously indicating that we think that they need sort of more training, and it seems to me that you could deliver that training through their already existing structure.
I didn't catch who?
McFamilies,
McFamily.
the Ministry of Children and Families. It seems to me that, and because you're the School of Social Work, you would think, I would have thought that you might be looking at some curriculum changes, for instance, and that if we go through the ministry, we might be saying, well, here's what's been identified. How would you approach this? How would you deliver that through your existing structures?
Yep, for sure. I think in my role and capacity, there definitely is a place within the school of social work and equipping future social workers that are going out into the field. It's also leveraging the supports and resources that are available through UBC. So just last week, we had a great initial meeting with the Center of Learning and Teaching. Center of Learning, CTLT, to just explore how they can support us with resources and curriculum development and such. Sherry, you have a little bit more information about unsafety and some of their training. And I have some connections within the learning and development and the research and policy stream. So, I mean, I think there's always an openness to continue to have some conversations. I don't know, Sherry, if you want to share a bit more.
I just was noticing that Trisha had her hand up, so I just wanted to give her an opportunity to speak. I'm not sure if it's on this particular point.
Oh, I can wait. I can wait. Sherry, go ahead.
Well, I mean, I guess my thought is, I mean, it's one of our biggest issues with this is going to be pulling it together from both sides. So it to me, it's something really unique and really different, because UBC traditionally research is, you do the research, you get the report, you send it out, you let your organizations use that for whatever advocacy they're going to do. But for me, this piece is like really special because it's actually trying to bring together both sides and finding a mechanism to educate both sides, but informing them of the other side. So it's informed by us to let them know what it is. And it also, I think it gives us an opportunity to get some feedback from social workers, hopefully, because we don't get that. Like we've been lucky enough to do an out of care community of practice, which is awesome. They invite us back every year, and there's like 50 different out of care workers there. And they're really interested in what we're doing, and they really want to hear all about our stories and stuff. But it's nice for us on the other side to also get information from them. So I feel like this is a really unique, and I'm really excited about the going forward with this project, because I don't think it's anything that's been done before. And as fairness president, I want to do stuff that's different and put us on the map and show people like, we can do lots of different things, and that people are looking at us like, I mean, Barbara has just been amazing. I can't say enough about all of the support she's given us all the way through. Like when we first got to know each other, we thought we were doing one thing together, and it's led to years of just, okay, what are we going to do next? What are we going to do next? And she's brilliant, and she comes up with the most fabulous ideas. So I think this is going to be a really positive thing. And so I think the more people we can get enthused about it and involved with it, the better. And MCFD might have their own, way that they usually do training and stuff. I don't know if we just want to drop it in their laps and let them go with that. I think that I would much rather say, let us all collaboratively have some kind of a say into maybe how they're going to roll it out. If we just drop it in their laps, we don't know what's going to happen with it. But I think if we keep involved with it and we make it collaborative, I think that we have a really good shot at getting better education for all of us. Hopefully that answers the question. Okay, Trisha.
Thanks, Sherry, and thanks for this presentation, Barbara. I think, to answer that earlier question about what would galvanize some next steps, uh, I don't know about other folks on this call, but I would certainly really benefit from a almost like a list or an abstract of some of the data findings based on the World Cafe and what's been gathered, as well as recommendations, kind of similar to what the representative for child and youth has prepared in the past with different reports, because if we have those findings and then recommendations from your vantage point, given what you're seeing and hearing, that I think would be a great uh, way to see who we might need to tap on the shoulder or who we might want to loop in that has that expertise that could support with some of these next steps.
That I'm curious to get your thoughts. Like certainly we have some like really nice robust data as Maddie had shared in those findings. And I mean we could draft something, but I also wonder like, the broader provincial survey, whether it's worthwhile to put together something now or wait until we have some greater data to examine some of those patterns and trends. What are your thoughts, or anyone here in your thoughts?
I mean, my recommendation would always be to gather more data as much as you can. And, even starting early or as soon as possible. And then from there, getting a sense of which respondents or which priority populations are potentially missing from the respondent list, and then taking a more targeted rollout approach with the survey could also be something to consider. One of the things I'm very conscientious of is when surveys and data collection is happening, who is missing out on responding to those kinds of things. Sometimes it can be due to, digital literacy access or challenges there. Sometimes there could be additional translation support that might be needed. Sometimes it's best to do focus groups rather than relying on people to click onto a link. And so, I mean, these are all things I would recommend considering as well with the rollout.
Thanks, Trisha, for that. Okay, any other comments?
Sorry.
Go ahead, Barbara.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I may be a little quiet, so I'm getting a bit closer. So thanks, Trisha, for that, because I think a big part around this work is that, of course, honoring lived expertise, but we also want to be able to lift it up with the rigor of research, which is, where Fairness UBC had come together, is that how do we use empirical evidence to inform the advocacy? And here it's around the research to inform education and training and knowledge sharing. So yeah, thanks so much for your reflections of how to be able to build up that research to make it meaningful. Because I think when we talk to whether it's MCFD, school boards, or others, it's like, well, where's the evidence? Show it to us. So yeah, definitely be able to give some more thought of how to enhance and bolster that. Thanks. Oh, sorry. I have another comment just to also, as Sherry was talking about in response to, how does it fit with MCFD training or other trainings? A big part of this work, I love, Sherry, how you said, oh, we're not going to hand it over to their lap, which I think is, always the fighting spirit of fairness, and that is exactly where we started with thinking about what we wished for, is that it is with and by kin caregivers as the starting point. It's not driven by MCFD's agenda or anyone else's agenda. And certainly there's an element of like a select group of fairness, and we do want to expand it out, and that's part of the outreach piece of a provincial survey that is led by Fairness, but it's also to outreach and let people know, hey, we're here. This is what we're doing. Let us know if you're interested in joining in the work, and if not, and people in their various capacities, but let us know what you need so that the strength of Fairness and your collective efforts can put some of those things into action. And I think that speaks to Mary, what you're saying of like, we need to not just write or talk or whatever it is. We need to act on this. And so that's always the spirit of this work with Fairness Together, is what are we going to do?
Okay, I think it's 5 minutes to. We got 5 more minutes left. If anybody's got some last minute comments, please feel free to raise your hand or just let us know. I have a hard time with the quiet. Mary's always telling me you don't give people enough time to think. So I'm trying really hard, Mary, to do that. But okay, go ahead, Cheryl.
So how can there be a way to overcoming obstacles of people moving forward who do not trust? There must be a way. Do we have to wait until a generation passes away?
I hope not.
Because I'm sorry to say that the biases that rely on the older generation often drift down to the younger, and so it doesn't die with us. It keeps on going because so there must be a way. How can there be a way of overcoming this, or is it just time?
That's $1 million question there, Cheryl. I don't know who can answer it. I know I can't. I know that people coming up, our hope is with the information that we're supplying and trying to give them, trying to work with MCFD and try to get some of these policy changes. We're in the midst of a review, a kinship review right now. Yeah. And they're asking us what are the things that aren't working, and we're telling them over and over and over again that there is so many out there that are not trusting MCFD, that there's got to be a way. So our way at Fairness is to try and collaborate with them, get these meetings. So we have meetings now once every 6 weeks with them, and we're on the books, and we talk to the people that are making the policies, and we tell them what's going on, and we can bring stories in from our kinship caregivers. And our hope is that eventually, but it's going to take a long time. There's years and years and years of things that have gone wrong. But I know that when we talk to caregivers now, we are hearing, I got a really good social worker and they're really helping me, and it's really great. But one of the other things is that they're changing so much. There's no consistency in how long I have that social worker. So you get this really great social worker, and then everything shifts, and you don't have that consistency through raising the child. And this is where our kinship caregivers get really frustrated, because now I've got a new person, and even though there's a file, it's still, you've got to talk to them and express to them what your wants and your needs are and what's happening in your individual situation. So we're trying our best, but yeah, it's a really tough thing to do. I mean, I've talked to people who are in informal agreements, and they are never going to come to MCFD because they don't trust MCFD. Even when I say, you could get, if you think of the future of the children, you could maybe get the provincial tuition fee waiver when they're adults. You could get this, you could get that, but yes. So some of them you're not going to get. The hope is for us is the more information we can get from MCFD on how they do things and try to help them change how they do things, better inform and educate their social workers to be more kind, more empathetic to the kinship caregivers and what they're going through, and not look at it through the lens of protective custody all the time, because the protection social worker is a very different person from the social worker that's a support social worker or an out of care worker. So they have different roles, and what we're saying is they have different roles, but it doesn't have to be how they treat people. You can be in any one of those three roles, but you should have the same compassion and the same level of respect dealing with them. So that's one of the things we're working on right now with them is let us have a document. So I can tell you that I was just in a meeting with the policy group a couple days ago, and one of the things that we asked them for was they shared with us this CAT, which is a kinship assessment tool. And I said, okay, well, this tool only comes into effect after the protective worker has met with them, and now they're in a program. So sharing that tool with them isn't all that great, but what we would like to share is if you had a document that told us, okay, so this is happening to you now, and here is the process of what's going to happen to you, because nobody knows that. So if they have a document that we can share on our website that people can look at and find out, like, okay, if they're taken in protective care, or if I go there, these are all the steps I'm going to have to go through, because they don't know that right now. And we know knowledge is power. It's all about what we don't know. So that's how I'm hoping we can move the needle, is to just keep having those conversations, keep getting all your feedback, keep just going at it. And hopefully we have enough information about all the different options that are out there, like we've done in the last couple of years, that people will look at them and go, well, wait a minute, maybe we could give this a try, right? And it may not be the people that are already in those informal agreements. I don't know if we can ever get them, but maybe we can get people that have this fall into their laps if they know there's support out there for them right at the hop, that there are other kinship caregivers out there. On that note, I'd like to thank Maddie and Barbara for the great presentation. And I'd like to thank all of you for joining us today. I really appreciate your coming and all your comments and your thoughts. And I did put in the chat, I know Crystal put in the chat about becoming a member. So if there are people on here that aren't members, if you're not a kinship caregiver, we do have another option as associate members. So our associate members can be people from all kinds of different organizations and stuff who are just really interested in what we're doing in kinship care. And so when we do our newsletter, we do try and share out with the associate members as well. There may be some that are more geared just towards the regular members, but I just wanted to say, you know, our fairness website is out there, or you can contact me anytime at fairness, the number 4CRR @gmail.com. And I answer that one myself. So thanks again, everybody. I really appreciate you coming.
As usual, thanks for all your hard work. Good job.
Thanks,
Good job.
Thank you.
Okay.